Chapter 18 London Calling, the 6th of March 2019, 12:30 p.m. I'm sat back on the same bench as I used yesterday, on the corner of Madison Square Park facing Ernie's bar. The walk down Fifth Avenue blew off the last of the hangover cobwebs and, at last, I'm ready to start my last full day in New York City. I'm still astonished at how much I've managed to cram into the week, and even more astonished to find myself still on Ernie's trail, revelation after revelation. Mr. Green could be forgiven for thinking I'd just taken his money, swallowed a pile of LSD tablets, and made up the biggest fantasy fairy tale possible. Thankfully, I can back up my story with photographs, interviews, and numerous contacts around the city. There was still one pressing matter to follow up on, though, before I left the States to fly home. What happened to Ernie after his exploits with Incredible Feet? Before the effects of alcohol consumed me last night, I spoke again with old Patrick in the bar. He suggested I come back again today for a chat about Ernie. Both Deborah and Ricky would be in too, and a few other regulars who would be able to share their experience of Ernie with me. The park was quieter than it was yesterday, probably due to the icy cold wind and grey rain clouds that hovered menacingly overhead. It wasn't a day to be outside, so I'd better get in. Just soft drinks for me today, though. I don't fancy another morning like this one for a while, and I have an early start tomorrow. Dictaphone at the ready? Check. Here goes. I will update you when I get back to the hotel, Mr. Diary. 5:45 p.m. At least I only had 4 beers. It could have been worse. I did ask for a Coke. I'm sure I did. Maybe they didn't hear me, or maybe they just didn't want to. Deborah and Ricky greeted me like an old friend when I entered. They didn't seem to be suffering from our late-night binge. No doubt they are used to it. The bar was only about a quarter full, and mainly the same chaps from yesterday. They were all older men. No women in here today. I would guess the youngest was in his 60s. Patrick was there in the same chair as he was yesterday, nursing a pint of Guinness. He nodded and called me over. Deborah and Ricky came to join us, leaving the bar unattended. No one seemed to mind. How are you feeling today, Paul? Ricky laughed, knowing full well how I was feeling. The pale complexion and the huge bags under my eyes painted an unflattering picture. A photograph of me today with the caption, "This is what too much drink does for you," should be sent to every group of Alcoholics Anonymous around the world to use in their promotional campaigns to warn off drink. Deborah plonked a large beer in front of me and mentioned the hair of the dog, and to be honest, that's what it tasted like at first. I explained that, basically, I was looking for clues as to what to do next. Ricky was the first to share his thoughts with Mr. Dictaphone and me. He said, Ernie worked on the business for a good number of years, and for a decade or more the business boomed. Towards the end, though, fashions were changing, footwear was changing, and people were no longer using the polishing service. That isn't to say they weren't visiting Ernie and paying him for his time, but the shoeshine industry was dying out, and he knew it. He decided to call it a day in May 1964. My father took over his position in the park, and Ernie effectively gave him the pitch and what remained of the business. He didn't sell it to him, he just gave it to him. Well, it was still profitable at this point. Ernie suggested he might get another 12 months out of it, and to make the most out of what was left. Incredible Feet had made my father a wealthy man, and he hadn't forgotten how it had all started. At first he refused. Then he tried to buy him out, but Ernie wouldn't take any money. He just said he had more than enough and he didn't need it. My father felt quite humbled and spoke with all the staff working under the franchise name. Every one of them was earning well from the business, and they were all shocked to hear that Ernie had decided to retire from it. They all wanted to give him something back, but he wouldn't hear of it. As it turned out, Incredible Feet continued to trade successfully for a further 5 years. My father and brother set up a trust fund for Ernie, but when he found out, he insisted all the money should go to local charities. They did as he asked. The business must have helped hundreds of people out over the years. He never sought any kind of publicity, but it didn't go unnoticed all the same. Then Patrick chipped in. He said, Ernie and I used to go fishing off one of the pier heads. We never caught anything much. We didn't have a clue what we were doing, but it was all fun and relaxing. He used to look out over the harbour towards Brooklyn and beyond. He would often talk about England and home. It was the only time I ever saw sadness in his eyes. He had lived away from his homeland longer than he had lived there, but he had never lost his affection for England, and his accent was still quite strong. I think I knew then that he would return home one day. He was still only in his 30s, a little older than me at that point, but still a youngster himself. He packed more into his life than most of us would have packed in 5 lifetimes. After an incredible feat, he seemed a little more introverted. He didn't socialise as much, and we wouldn't see him around as often. He was still the same Ernie, cheerful, kindly, and extremely witty, but something was missing. Deborah said, I think he had spent his whole life fighting for a cause, and suddenly realised he didn't have to fight any more at that time. Perhaps he was drained. Who knows? Though he didn't say, the devastating death of Robbie had taken its toll. He was the displaced person now. Back to Patrick. In late 1964, he confided in me that it was time for him to go home. We'd all embraced him as one of us. We all took him for granted. I don't think any of us had really stopped to think what he was going through or what he might be thinking. He must have been missing his family terribly. He hadn't seen or heard from them in years. At first I didn't believe him, but then he started to make plans. He gave notice on the apartment and sold off furniture and bits and pieces he couldn't take with him. He didn't make a fuss. He just felt it was the time. He was still grieving for Robbie on top of everything else. I don't think he ever truly got over his death, his murder. In January 1965, the day after New Year's Day, he announced he was leaving to go back to England. He planned to sail in the March. We sort of knew it was coming, but we was devastated when he confirmed it. I suppose we never really thought the day would come. Well, news spread like wildfire up and down the blocks of East and West Side. He was inundated with letters, presents, and gifts. This was a poor neighbourhood. People didn't have a lot to give, but they wanted Ernie to know just what he meant to them. He confirmed his leaving date as the 15th of March 1965. He would sail from New York to the port of Southampton, and from there he planned to find work in London before finding a route back north to reunite with his family. Then another man joined us at the table. He introduced himself as Harry. He said, It is over 50 years since Ernie left us, and I remember that day as though it were yesterday. You've never seen a man have so many leaving parties. Everyone wanted to say goodbye and give him their own send-off. On the day of his departure, it felt like half of New York had come down to the pier to wave him off. It was like royalty. I don't think the staff or the other passengers had any idea what was going on. There was cheering and yelping. Grown men and women were in tears. Young children even threw flowers and screamed his name. John Lennon didn't get that kind of reception. No, said Patrick. We shot him dead. Harry jumped back in. It was embarrassing for him, really. He was very uncomfortable with it all. Ernie didn't know where to look. He only had a battered old suitcase and a rucksack. Folk were looking around for some big movie star, but saw nothing more than a bewildered Joe Bloggs waving back at the masses. Patrick joined in again. And then the siren blew, and the engines roared. When the ship pulled away from the dock, reality struck. He was going, and we were never going to see him again. We stood there, all of us, waving and hollering until the boat had passed Liberty, was little more than a speck on the horizon. There was a lull for a long time after that. The place was just not the same. Yeah, people got on with their daily lives. We told stories in the bars and laughed and joked about this strange Englishman who took on and beat the mafia. He took on legendary status in these parts, a mystical man of mystery. He came, he saw, he helped, he conquered. And Harry said, "But the truth is, he was just an ordinary man. An extraordinary, ordinary man. No ego, no arrogance, no flamboyance. He didn't seek the limelight and he didn't court publicity. He polished shoes and he made people happy. Hardly the stuff of legend." And then Patrick finished off. "That is why he is a legend, Harry. That's exactly why."